Hello everyone, this is Jim from TZM Education and the UK and London chapter. I'll be your host for today's show. That intro there was from Pink Floyd, Another Brick in the Wall, released in 1979. They could see the education system for what it was. It's basically a cookie cutting plant for a bunch of slaves, and you are another brick in the wall, as they say. And unfortunately, even though much time has passed since 1979, people still don't quite seem to have the message yet. And much as it pains me to cut it off before the guitar solo, I think we've got a bit of a show to get on with. So the second piece of audio you heard was from a very interesting individual called Erica Goldson. And that was her graduation speech. Not exactly a resounding thank you to her education system, shall we say, but a lot of truth spoken nonetheless. Not that, of course, it's all teachers' fault, really. They're just a reflection of the culture we live in, which is, of course, unfortunate. And really, in a funny kind of way, it's a case of the chicken and the egg, because what do you change first? A culture that is extremely coercive, rigid and bureaucratic and all those sorts of things, or do you change the education system? The answer is really both, because both are just a reflection of each other. You can't change one without changing the other, and that's why the Zeitgeist Movement's here. But we need to understand as a movement, I think, that this is a two-pronged attack. We're doing very, very good work on the internet, and we're doing very well at the top-down approach of communicating this message to the world at large. But I personally think that we are not necessarily doing great things coming from the roots, so coming from the ground up. And what I mean by that is the education system. If we could get into schools and get this message through to kids who already have this idea of environmental notions planted in their brains, if you will, through the mainstream media and their schools, taking care of the planet and things, then we might be able to just take the next hop, skip and a jump to a resource-based economy, and the kids coming out of school have a very different set of values and ideologies in building the world which they will live in than the ones that their parents, teachers, and system at large are giving them. I think this is very important for us as a movement, which is why I have started TZM Education. The purpose of the site is twofold, basically. It's to correlate all the necessary evidence to validate the educational proposals of a resource-based economy. And secondly, it's to help movement members get into schools through a variety of different activities for different age groups, which is listed on the site in the activism section, and get this message out to the kids at large. If you want to visit the site, it's www.tzmeducation.org. What I wanted to do in this radio broadcast is to include my lecture that I gave at the World Z-Day event in London. I'm going to include the audio of that presentation, or at least a practice version of the audio that I have on my computer, so that I could play it religiously in my car so that I could learn the words so I wouldn't stumble over them, even though on the day I actually did. Oh well. So I'm going to include that audio here for you guys, so that you can have a listen through to that lecture. If you want to see it with the slides and what have you, then it is up on the main page of my website. So if you go there, you'll see that there, along with loads of other studies and some interesting articles that I've written and I've had other people write as well. I'm going to save a lot of these topics that I'm going to talk about today for afterwards. Obviously, I'll be talking about education, and a lot of that will be outlined in the lecture that you're going to hear. But afterwards, I would like to talk about activism and strategy, and how to get this message out to the public at large, and what have you. So I think that probably leaves us in a pretty good place to now have a listen to this lecture that I gave at Z-Day 2011. The tenets of a resource-based economy are wide-ranging, of course, but they rest on two very firm footings. They are the physical sciences and the humane application of them to the social design holistically. It's clear that a productive and relevant education for all with regards to these areas would be essential for such a society to be able to function properly. Unfortunately, I know from working in schools that we are a long way from a productive and relevant education with regards to our species' sustainability on this planet. The reason for this is simple. Education reflects culture, and culture reflects education. Just a cursory glance at human beings' conduct on this planet would seem enough to realize that both education and society as a whole need to undergo a significant change in values if we are to move into any sort of sustainable social structure. So how do education and culture reflect each other exactly? The main incentive system in the world today is money, which basically equals competition for profit. This was of course an excellent idea when we had a true scarcity of much needed resources for our survival. However, this does not need to be the case anymore, as we now have the technology to not only sustainably produce long-lasting goods in a relative abundance for all the Earth's people, but we can do so with little or no physical labour at all, and with a far greater level of efficiency. In a new incentive system based on progress rather than profit, the cultural and educational emphasis would be on finding new and creative solutions via the scientific method to solve problems, rather than relying on arbitrary opinions. Therefore, self-development, critical thinking, effective communication, collaboration, and a general knowledge of the subjects that have a direct correlation to the integrity of the planet and everyone on it would be the new educational paradigm. Learning would be seen as a fun and lifelong pursuit, instead of seemingly stopping at a certain age so that you can earn some money to own as much stuff as possible before you die. Punishment and reward is essential for a dysfunctionally rooted society such as ours to work at all, and is therefore the current dominant teaching philosophy that is promoted in most schools today. Quite simply, the educational system is a natural byproduct of the society it's in and vice versa. Whilst there may be some positive change in education, it will never be significant enough in a society based explicitly on greed, differential advantage, and acquisition at any cost. Punishment is an easy behavioral tactic to attack in terms of its ineffectiveness towards modifying aberrant behavior in the long term. As I'm sure everyone in this room is well aware, people act according to what they pick up from their environment. How many times do we have to hear that the abused become the abusers before we realize that we need to change the causal mechanism behind these tendencies? When a child is punished, the inappropriate behavior is all but forgotten instantly. A chastised child will not be thinking of the errors of their ways, but will instead be thinking about the punishment brought upon them and how much they dislike the parent or teacher that inflicted it, as well as how they will go about not getting caught next time. Children are not born bad, and teaching them right from wrong does not have to come in the form of discipline or bribes. For example, trying to help them to understand how their actions may have hurt another person's feelings is a good starting point in attempting to instill in them a decent set of moral values. Above all, a child needs to feel appreciated for what they do, who they are, and who they want to be. Ultimately, they need to feel loved. Now, the seemingly nice twin to punishment in the act of behavior modification is reward. Whilst this may at first glance seem to be a preferred route to take, it is not all it's cracked up to be. Whilst prizes and praise may be effective in the short term, they can actually be detrimental to long-term intrinsic motivation and will keep needing to be applied in order for the desired behavior to continue. More on this soon. It is first important to point out the reasoning behind the desire to modify behavior in the first place. Who are you doing it for, and why? It is one thing to want to stop a child being violent or running across a busy road, and quite another to tell them to stand still and be quiet, when in actual fact they don't have to. This is really just an adult enforcing their will upon a child in order to coerce them to act as they do, as well as attempting to impress other adults with how well they have their pet child trained to behave according to the current social status quo. So as mentioned earlier, it's the use of punishment and reward that really keeps our current social model working. School is no exception, and in fact it can't be if the integrity of the system itself is to be maintained. Rewards seem to be the more palatable of the two behavior modification methods currently used in education, so let's look at them now in more detail. Extensive research now shows that the use of rewards as an incentive to get a child to learn leads to students merely meeting the bare minimum of what is required of them in order to get the grade or reward on offer. Not only this, but it also has a significant impact to their long-term intrinsic interest in a given task or subject, rather than them feeling enthusiastic, autonomous, and creative in what they are doing. This point is well made in the book Punished by Rewards by psychologist, author, and teacher Alfie Kohn. When we are working for a reward, we do exactly what is necessary to get it and no more. Not only are we less apt to notice peripheral features of the task, but in performing it we are also less likely to take chances, play with possibilities, or follow hunches that might pay off. Risks are to be avoided whenever possible because the objective is not to engage in an open-ended encounter with ideas. It is simply to get the goodie. One example from the numerous studies that point to the detrimental effect the use of rewards has with regard to problem solving and general motivation was done at the University of Rochester. In this experiment, 20 children were taken into a room one by one to play with some puzzles. Half the kids were told they would be given a $5 reward for each puzzle they tested, and half were not. Once these puzzles were completed, each child was left alone in the room for a few minutes and observed via a hidden camera. Of the 10 children who were paid for completing the puzzles, only one continued playing with them in these remaining few minutes. However, every single one of the 10 who weren't paid continued to play with them even though they didn't have to. Hopefully, this study should make this point very clear. Rewards kill long-term intrinsic motivation. Praise can surprisingly be detrimental as well, for it elicits the same action as any other reward mechanism. This is not to say that making relevant, positive or constructive comments about the work in question or general encouragement is not beneficial, but heaping praise on top of what should already be rewarding only detracts from the true sense of achievement an individual actually feels towards the task in question. The student then also starts to become dependent on praise from an authoritarian figure in order to feel motivated to apply themselves to future tasks. Indeed, why is praise needed other than to encourage students to complete the tasks we set for them and that we deem worthy of praise? This further cements our position of dominance rather than allowing the child to pursue their genuine areas of interest with our help. So learning is currently the process to get rewards rather than the other way round. And then we wonder why kids are so disillusioned with learning in school. Please understand that a monetary-based society demands a constant influx of wage slaves, and that school is designed to be the perfect cookie-cutting plant for just that. In the words of George Carlin, they, the rich elite, don't want a well-educated public capable of critical thinking. They want people just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork, and just dumb enough to passively accept increasingly shittier jobs. This is what our system produces: competitive, manipulative gaming strategies as a mode of survival. Then, in the same breath, we try to teach kids to be nice and share, and we wonder why an ever-increasing amount of them are on or go on to being on antidepressants later on in life. Could it have anything to do with the fact that adults do the exact opposite of what they teach their kids to do in their own day-to-day lives? So when a child in school asks the teacher, "Why do I need to learn this?" or "How will I need this later on in life?" the teacher replies, "Of course you need it," or "because you have to." This masks the fact that the real answer is that you probably won't. However, school is largely a test of your character with regards to completing tasks, whether relevant or not, on time and to the required standard. This means that you will be a good worker in the marketplace, as you will not question the merits of the task in hand and will instead make sure you do what you are told when you are told to do it to the best of your ability, even if you hate the task in question. Remarkably, there are certain rule-free schools actually in existence today. Whilst these would not be the same as in a resource-based economy, they do provide evidence to suggest that a more liberating approach to education can increase the intrinsic desire of the student to learn. Two examples to check out would be the democratic school system in the States and the Summerhill School here in the UK. At these schools, teachers and pupils arrive at decisions together, and children do not have to go to lessons if they don't want to. Now, you would be forgiven for thinking that these children would not be able to reach a decent academic standard at such schools and would simply muck around all day, but you would be wrong. The fact is that kids at these schools attain the necessary GCSE results even though they don't have to. More importantly, in all the independent reports done on these schools, the kids are found to be absorbed in learning, happier, creative, have a strong moral sense of right and wrong, a good community spirit, and a fantastic ability to communicate constructively in general conversation. This should not be a surprise. Kids are born with an inquisitive nature to learn about the world around them. They don't need to be forced. It isn't their fault that the lesson is so drab, uninspiring, and utterly boring that they've switched off. Maybe it could be that the child was not given a choice in how they would like to learn the topic in question. Or perhaps it's because the teacher is really thinking of the money he or she will be paid at the end of the month and hitting targets, rather than making the content of what is actually being taught relevant and interesting. So because of this ill-informed judgment that kids do not want to learn, we have decided to turn to using extrinsic motivators in an attempt to incentivize them, which actually ends up making the problem you're trying to solve even worse. Therefore, I have a collection of activities and presentations at the site that members themselves can take into their local schools to start informing the adults of tomorrow about the ideas behind a resource-based economy, so we can help to show them that learning should be cherished and never a chore. As this picture points out, adults tend to take a longer time to get their head around the concepts we discuss. For the most part, they've been surviving by doing the exact opposite for so long that the thought of questioning the current social status quo seems completely asinine to them, regardless of its merits. Kids, on the other hand, have not been fully indoctrinated into this system as yet, and are therefore still able to grasp the incredibly simple notions proposed by the Venus Project. This is why those of us that can should start to focus our attentions on informing the youth of our communities of this new direction in fun and engaging ways. The Zeitgeist Movement is an activist educational movement explicitly, so we have to ask ourselves the question, what is the most effective way to get this message across to the world at large? In reality, we live in a monetary-based society, and there is a word for what you have to do when you're trying to get an idea across to people in this culture. It's called marketing. We must start to be strategic and approach those who will understand what we are talking about in the most effective way possible, rather than wasting time with people who just don't get it. I'm not knocking any form of communication per se, or suggesting that we shouldn't answer our critics. Far from it. I merely want everyone here to question the approach they are using to see if they feel it is getting the message across effectively and to the right demographic. The simple fact is that the youth of today are more in tune with the notions of protecting the environment due to climate change and environmental issues now being propagated in the mainstream media and in schools. In my experience, they are ready to hear what we are saying with a far more open mind than the older generations. Also, on a more pragmatic note, they will be around for longer to be able to push for this direction than an adult will be. This may seem harsh and cold, but it's true. We all have old schools, for example. Why not give them a call to see if you can do a presentation there? In the UK, we have the perfect opportunity to do this with what's called citizenship lessons or general studies. I'd never done a presentation of this kind before, but I'm a big believer in jumping in the deep end and learning to swim. So I ended up talking to a captive audience of 180 kids and teachers in a secondary school that I teach at about the Zeitgeist Movement and the Venus Project. The bottom line is that if even 200,000 members of the Zeitgeist Movement did this and went to just one school and talked to 180 kids as I did, then we could potentially reach approximately 36 million young adults about to enter this system. If we are an activist educational movement, then activities like this are imperative. We must make sure we are walking the walk and not just talking the talk, myself included. That is why I've been into several schools to do everything from playing collaborative games with 7-year-olds to giving full presentations on the Venus Project to 17-year-olds. One example I would like to share with you is a game I played for the 5 to 10 age range, where you take 3 hoops and put them in a row at equal distances of a few meters apart. In the middle hoop, you have an uneven number of beanbags, and at the other hoops, you have an even number of kids per side. The rules are that you have to get as many beanbags in your team's hoop as possible, and you're only allowed to carry one bag at a time. Other than that, try not to kill each other, but anything goes. I'm sure you can imagine the chaos that ensued. Before long, there were beanbags up jumpers, throwing the bags from the middle hoop back to your own and all sorts. Occasionally, I'd stop the game and count up the beanbags, and then, as the team with more beanbags were cheering their supposed victory, I would remind the opposite team that the game was not over and the chaos would start all over again. After a while of this, I stopped the game and asked them how long this could go on for, to which, of course, they replied, "Forever!" I then asked them what the solution was, and one child got it. Put all the hoops together and put the beanbags in the middle. The only way to win was to share, and the seed has been planted, so to speak. I think this game personifies our current social paradigm rather eloquently myself. We could stop the game any time we like. It is ideas like this that came from members' contributions. I now need a team of people to help me correlate all the necessary studies for the site and to contribute any ideas that you consider useful with regards to helping us to get this message across to the younger generations. The project is still in the developmental stages, so please do let me know if you want to be involved and can help by emailing me via the website at www.tzmeducation.org. The children of today deserve a better tomorrow than the one currently on offer. The time to start making this tomorrow a reality is today. I hope you found that useful. There's certain areas of it I would like to expand on and just share with you a few experiences I've had from going into schools. I've been into a couple of secondary schools. I have been into a couple of primary schools. I'm a teacher myself, basically, so I do have a potential of a foot in the door. These were very, very interesting experiences. It's really fulfilling to stand in front of a room of 180 people who've never considered these ideas or these concepts at all and blow their world apart, and hopefully their minds. But I think they got a really good response. I mean, on both occasions that I went to the secondary schools, at least, I had my time slots extended by sometimes up to 2.5 hours. I mean, at the first school I went to, we were scheduled to speak for 45 minutes and have a 15-minute Q&A, and the head of the sixth form basically cancelled the rest of the day and said, right, screw that, we're all going to sit around a table and you're going to ask these guys questions, because basically it was me and Simon, who was then UK coordinator, and they just sat us at the end of a table and grilled us for about 2.5 hours. So that was cool. And the second occasion, the head of sixth form went, right, well, you better sell it to me in 15 minutes then, mate. And I went, oh, great, resource-based economy in 15 minutes, thanks. Nevertheless, I stood up there for 15 minutes, and they gave me another hour and a half, and they invited me back. You know, the idea that people don't want to hear these notions and that they're going to stand up and scream all sorts of ad hominems and ill-thought-out assumptions about what it is, like communism and all these other, base assumptions, is a little bit erroneous. Most of the people I talk to tend to have two objections. One is that you won't get anyone else to agree, which is rather ironic considering the fact that you're actually talking to them and the next person you talk to will say exactly the same thing. So really it's just a case of them not talking to each other. And actually they do agree, and actually they're more similar than they think, and la-di-da. And the second one would be, well, it'll never happen in my lifetime, so why should I bother? And my response to that is, well, why bother doing anything? Because if it's all just about the gravy train, then that gravy train never ends, because, of course, 5 Ferraris isn't enough. When you get to 5, you need 15. So why bother? Why bother even getting out of bed and trying in the first place? Life's a ride, really, and I think that what you stand for on the ride is what matters. So obviously I want a resource-based economy, probably just like everybody listening to this, but the bottom line is it boils down to what you're prepared to stand for as an individual whilst you're on this planet. You're either prepared to plunder it and plunder everyone around you, subscribe to some outdated, primitive notions of how you should treat each other and your fellow man on this planet, or whilst you're here, you're going to try and make things better. For me, I'm going to try and make things better. That's it. It's really that simple. Well, of course it's possible. Big change, of course, is possible, and I point to many examples about that. But what it comes down to is you're either going to look at the possibilities or look at the obstacles, really, doesn't it? So anyway, there's a little bit of a myth I would like to attempt to dispel, that somehow adults know better than children. As you can probably hear from the tone of my voice, this really does get under my skin. So I believe I heard somewhere before, and I could be wrong on this, that an adult smiles between, on average, 25, 30, maybe 40 times a day, and for children, or maybe varying on age, that goes into the hundreds. So, grow up, right, because you're having such a good time as an adult. I can't wait to get there and not smile and laugh and run around, and play and have fun and have some joy in my life. Yeah, I'll grow up and be an adult. Hey, maybe I'll sign up to the military, and then I can go to war and be shot at by people I've never met and shoot back at them for no other reason other than for some corporation and their interests in plundering all the natural resources of that country. Yes, great idea. I think I'll become an adult. How about no? So that's what I always say to my kids. Don't grow up. There's a big difference between being responsible and being grown up, and unfortunately adults grew up, but they just never actually learned how to be responsible. So I think the children need to do some very, very different things to what their predecessors and their parents have done. But unfortunately, they're being coerced, just like not the people listening to this show, but like a lot of people in our culture are coerced to join this crazy world. And there's a few things I say to kids sometimes along that train of thought. For instance, they call me weird. I'm a drum teacher, so I try and be as eccentric as possible. And basically, they call me weird. And I say to them, is the world mad? And they're like, yeah. You normal? Well, yeah. So you're used to the world being mad, and that makes you sane. And they're like, oh, well, no, I suppose it doesn't. And it's like, well, there you go. Maybe you should try being weird, and then we'll all be sane, and the world will start to be more normal. You can, and kids, think about these things in a much more simplistic way, and they usually come around and go, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. And there's so many great examples of kids slicing through adults' BS like a knife through butter. One of them I'd like to include is something that Doug Millett, who I'm sure you're familiar with, brought up in his lecture to the Texas humanists. was an example of his daughter and him. He went out the room and he left the adverts on the telly. And when he came back in, his daughter said to him, "Daddy, why are there starving people in the world?" And he clocked, obviously, she must have seen an Oxfam advert or something. And he said, "Well, they just don't have the money to buy food. There's food, sweetheart." And she said, "Well, but there's food in the store down the road, Daddy. They could just have that." And he's like, "Yeah, they just don't have the money." She gets up. She says, "Money's dumb," and walks out. Just brilliant, absolutely fantastic. I'm sure Doug was very proud of her. And there's so many things like that. There, for instance, if you go onto TED Talks and type in Adora Svistak, I can't pronounce her name, so I'll spell it Adora, and then the surname is Svitak. She just lands absolute logic bombs left, right, and center on adult BS. If you want to check that out, it's very, very good. It's somewhere on my site. I think it's in the activism section. But nevertheless, you really should check out that TED Talk. It's excellent and highly amusing. There are some, and obviously Seven Suzuki, who I'm sure we're all familiar with as well, gave that absolutely amazing speech at the UN, once again showing the adult world for what it is and showing it through a childlike perspective. You see, somehow I think adults think that because they were once children, that now they know better. But actually, I've got this theory that I think they forget what's important rather than retain it. I think somehow it's kicked out of you. A great example of this would be at the end of one of my presentations, the first presentation I gave actually at the sixth form. The first question I got was actually from a 17-year-old lad who said, "Mate, do you really think I'm going to want to go to school if I don't have to?" And I said, "Right. So as a human being, you're born into this world curious. You tried to get up and stand and walk. You crawled around and picked things up and put them in your mouth and all these sorts of things. And you'd push yourself by climbing on the climbing frame and all these sorts of things. And you're curious and you want to find out about what the world is. You want to go forth and explore. Yeah?" And he went, "Yeah." And I said, "And now you're turning around at the tender age of 17 and you're telling me that you don't want to do those things for the rest of your life? And somehow this is my fault." Mate, you should be pointing the finger of blame at this society and the world at large because they've robbed you of something that you were born intrinsically with, and that was the desire to learn. And now you're telling me that you don't want to learn unless you're forced. Hopefully you can see my point entirely. And he did kind of had this look on his face of like, wow, I've never thought of it like that before. And we moved on to the next question. But that just shows you the depth of indoctrination that we are dealing with in our system at large and the education system in particular. So, like I say, there could be dozens of examples of kids, who bring this forth. A great film for you all to watch, in fact, would be The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. It paints this point perfectly. Two kids, one Jewish who's in a concentration camp, and one who is the son of a Nazi general who is administering the camp. I think it's actually set in Auschwitz. And they meet by the fence, and they're friends and everything, and they really just trying to deal with what this situation's all about. And it's a fantastic indictment on adults who just forget to see the world the way children do. Children will just go into a playground. It doesn't matter whether you're black, white, tall, fat, skinny, whatever. It doesn't make a difference to them. They just run in and play. And I think adults need to start turning around and learn something from the world of children big time. So that's that rant over with. On to the next one. How the site's been going so far. And it's been going really well since its inception. I was really pleased and proud to speak at Z-Day. I've been on Neil's show, VTV, V Radio, which if you're not subscribed to, you really should. It's excellent show, loads of interesting guests and topics. I have been on Zeitgeist TV, live TV, with the guys over in Texas, I think. It is. This is really my last roll of the dice because I'm not going to lie. I expected a few more contributions to the site in terms of either research, activities to include on the site, but most importantly, I really expected members to be coming through and saying, I'm going into my school next week, or how should I approach my school, or anything like that, any kind of feedback about actually going into schools and getting this message across to kids. And I'll be honest with you, I can count them on less than one hand. I'm not trying to make anybody out there feel bad. I know you're all working really hard, or like a lot of you guys are, but also there's something that we don't mention too often, and that's about procrastination. We're all guilty of this, okay, me included. Even though I've started a website, I've spoke on Z-Day, I've been into schools, I've done presentations, I've written articles and everything else, I still know that I've slacked off. And I know one thing for sure, human beings haven't achieved the things they have achieved by sitting back and chilling out or procrastinating and doing other things. So even though I've got a full-time job and kids and I've done all of this, I can actually turn around to myself and say it's not good enough. I know there's times when I could have done more. And of course, I don't want everybody to constantly walk around with a burden of guilt on their shoulders, for what they have or what they haven't done out there. But I think it's also important to know that there are certain activities and certain strategies that we could use as a movement that would get this message out to infinitely more people. If we cast back to my lecture, for instance, if even half the movement phoned their old school, that's 200,000, let's say, members phone their old school and got a position talking to 180 kids, then we're going to reach 36 million kids about to enter this system, who will enter it with a completely different philosophical view of the world around them than the one that they've probably been given for the previous, God knows how many years, 17, 18 years. If we are an activist movement, then we will be looking to do it at every avenue and possibility we can. And I think we're doing brilliant things with screenings and town hall meetings, and obviously the Zeitgeist Media Festival is brilliant. But I think there's another thing that's worth mentioning here. There are vehicles already on the road that we could jump on, so to speak. For instance, the schools I've spoke at have citizenship lessons. These lessons are attended by the entire sixth form population, basically, usually anything up to 200 pupils and the staff at the school. Many political and social organisations talk at these events in the UK. Let's get in there, guys. Let's do it. The revolution isn't just going to happen on Facebook. And that's not knocking Facebook. I'm not knocking anything the movement members are doing. We've done fantastic work. But to sit back and admire how great your painting is doesn't really get you on to painting the next one, which could potentially be better. We have to strive. We have to want to get this message out to as many people as possible. And I think that there are audiences out there for us to service, is my point. As I say, citizenship lessons being one of them in the UK. I don't know whether you have a similar thing in your country, but if you do, then pick up the phone, send an email, get in touch, harass these people. Another thing I've learned about schools is they are so busy and tied up that if you don't keep knocking on the door, they're not going to pay any attention. So keep harassing these people, get in the schools and talk to these people. Obviously, you need to know your stuff, so make sure you've gone through all the material properly and you've had a practice at answering questions and what have you. And really don't worry, about screwing up or anything. An essential part of learning is screwing up. So don't worry, you learn as you go. There's also other avenues such as student unions that we should be contacting. Once again, they probably have courses that are completely relevant to what we're doing as a movement. Either find those courses or just contact the student union. Let's get into these student unions. Let's talk to the student body there. Environmental fairs would be another one. Oh, and a really big one, established music festivals. Even if you haven't got the money to get a ticket to go into a music festival, like a big music festival, at least stand outside with some leaflets or a banner or a board or a sandwich board or whatever it is with some statement on it and the movement's website, and just stand there if that's what it takes and talk to people going into the festival. Give us a presence. There's a very important notion in this system called marketing, which we need to understand as a movement. Regardless of where we would like to be, the fact of where we are is we are in a monetary system, and a monetary system gets its ideas out to the population via marketing, as I mentioned in my lecture. Now, marketing works on the strategy that you have to hit people in several different media streams in a short space of time in order to sell your product, so to speak. And a really good example of this was myself and the London chapter went to Cambridge Strawberry Fair, which is a free festival in Cambridge where 35,000 people attended. We spoke to people all day, got an absolutely awesome response from everybody. Everybody saw the sense in the idea, and the amount of people who said, I've heard of that, or, oh, my mate keeps telling me to watch those films, and, oh, it's you guys. Oh, yeah, I've heard something about this. And the amount of people who said that and came over and were warm and receptive was very telling. This tells you something important about marketing. If people hear the idea or they see a link on Facebook and then they go on YouTube and they see it in the recommended links and then they turn up at the festival they're going to and they see actual human beings standing there giving out these leaflets to people, and then they see something about the Zeitgeist Media Festival or a town hall meeting in their local area, it all stacks up to the point where they can't ignore us anymore. And they have to check it out. Then they check it out, and they join the whole process, and it snowballs. And that's how critical mass happens, guys. It has to happen through many different channels and many different mediums. And I think that we are missing some of those mediums at the moment. That's my only point. I think if there is a audience that will listen to us, that is already there, that we can invite ourselves to speak at, then I think that we should, as a movement, be pursuing those. I mean, I've even written letters to my local MP. It's not hard. It seems like it'll take forever, but it won't. Include a copy of the DVD, include a flyer if you've got one, write a quick letter. I even have templates. If you want to get in touch with me, I'll happily send you all of my templates. If everybody contacted their local MP, it might do nothing, but at least it will put it up in people's heads, you know. It will alert them to our presence, which is what we need to do as a movement right now. You know, I think Peter's said this before. If you've only got a couple of hours to spare every week to dedicate to this cause, then that's fine. You shouldn't feel bad about that. But at the same time, I guess I'm just asking people to make sure that they are self-analyzing and being self-critical and asking themselves whether those couple of hours are the most effective couple of hours they could be spending trying to get this message out to people. People who've never heard of it before. People who are willing to listen. There are many of them out there, guys. I speak to them every day. A cheeky thing I do is I go into schools and they don't keep a very close eye on their photocopying machines, and I photocopy Zeitgeist flyers because I can't afford to get them done myself. And if I'm ever going past a newspaper stand, I'll just put one of our flyers inside a few of the newspapers. If there's other people leaving their flyers at a petrol station, then I will put our flyers on there on the counter so that people can pick them up. Every time I buy something, I've got them in my pocket. I know this sounds obsessive, but if you've got them on you, it's just a case of day-to-day life. You're picking one out of your pocket, and once you've paid, you go, okay, thanks very much, I'll exchange you that. And then you just turn around and walk away. At the end of the day, think of the amount of people you meet in your everyday today life. You don't have to be obsessive. It's just a case of if you've got a pocket full of them, you just pull one out whenever you're meeting someone, and you're probably never going to see them again, or even if you are, and then you just hand it over as an exchange. I don't know how many people have looked at those flyers and gone on to look at things, but it comes back to that marketing principle that they see it and they go, oh, Zeitgeist. They've either never heard of it before or that's the first time you've landed it. And then they go on YouTube later and they see it again. And then they see us at a music festival. And this is how it works. If we are maintaining a presence, then our presence will be felt amongst the masses and we will reach a critical mass. If we do not maintain that presence, it will not happen. if we do nothing, nothing happens. And if this is a movement for critical mass, then we should strategically be looking at developing strategies that approach the maximum amount of people possible. So I guess I'm saying, whilst we should be servicing our own interests and bringing people to our events, we also need to consider going to other events and servicing those, as I've previously mentioned. The Canada chapter said something really great about this on one of their shows. They said they turned up, they had 3 chapter meetings, they sorted out their strategy, and every other time they had a meeting, it was usually round a table and a stall actually giving out stuff and talking to the public. I think that's an excellent notion. I think it's testament to why they're doing so well, that they make sure they are actually active and they're not just talking amongst themselves. It's I sometimes make the joke that we don't want to turn into the Judean People's Front. If you've seen Monty Python and The Life of Brian, you'll understand what I mean. If not, you should really watch it because it is hilarious. Anyway, I think there's some great examples out there in the movement of strategy and people doing things that are reaching a lot of people and people doing proactive things to get this message across. Remember, guys, we are to a certain extent on a time limit. You live in a decaying system. It's a parasitic system. It's feeding on itself. So I'm afraid we don't have all the time in the world. We have to actually get a move on and get this message out there to the public at large. So I would say, again, if anybody out there wants to get this message into schools and has an idea of how they want to do that, or wants advice, or can provide case studies or activities that other members can take in, or just wants to let me know that they've been into a school and it was successful and what strategies they had that helped with that, then please do get in contact with me at the website, which is www.tzmeducation.org. Once again, I'd like to reiterate that this isn't supposed to be a beratement of anybody in the movement. That's not how I want this to come across. I merely want to stress the importance of self-analysis and self-critique. Is what we are doing the most effective thing to do? If that, as long as that's a question that always goes around in your mind, then there'll always be initiative and there'll always be a creative thought process to further this message to a wider audience. And I think I speak for everyone here when I say that is what we all want. So ultimately, I hope that's what resides with you, and I hope some of the things I've mentioned stick with you. Because in the words of Seven Suzuki's dad, who she mentioned in her speech at the UN all those years ago, you are what you do, not what you say. So let's make sure our movement is actually doing something to bring this message to the wider community and spread these ideas so that we can see this planet change into something that it deserves to be changed into, and that is a safe haven and a beautiful place for every man, woman and child who lives on the pale blue dot we call home. Thanks for your time, guys.
From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. But for us, it's different. Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on the mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.